small things. And then the Hong Kong ministerial has a series of deadlines, and some important ones come up very quickly. April 30th, we're supposed to have modalities of agricultural market access, which means some agreement on the extent of market access and the reduction of tariffs and quotas, with actual schedules by July 31st. That's pretty quick. We're going to define export subsidies. That gets into issues like guarantees and credits by April 30th. And then we're going to begin to get some things on services by that date as well, and some definitive offers draft schedules on services by October 31st. All previous deadlines in the Doha round procedures have been missed, so I guess a good forecast is that these will be missed as well, which is discouraging. Our bottom line conclusion is that it will not be possible to wrap up this round by the time set in the U.S. Trade Promotion Act, Trade Promotion Authority, which expires June 30th, 2007, but there are pre-notification deadlines in December and in April, December 2006 and April of 2007. So our view, which of course officials stoutly disagree with at this juncture, but that there will need to be a renewal, at least a short renewal, to complete the round on with a high level of success. Now let me talk briefly about what we see as the blockage in this. Europe has been adamant that it will not improve its agricultural market access and subsidy offers to date, which are modest, until it sees something on non-agricultural market access and services. The United States has an internal contest, as every major country has an internal contest, but internal contest between renewal of the Farm Act and the negotiation of the Doha round results, and the farm senators and congressmen, of course, want to renew the Farm Act first and put the subsidies in strong language for at least another 6 or 8 years, and the trade folk would like to keep some flexibility on that. So that's quite a battle going on here in Washington. Europe has a similar, more difficult battle in the farm area. Meanwhile, countries, and I'll just pick out the 3 most important: Brazil, India, and China, in the developing world, are not keen on liberalizing services or non-agricultural market access. And their basic position is, we want to see the money on agriculture before you do this. That's a little bit hypocritical for India, more than a little bit hypocritical, because India is a very protected country on agriculture and has no real interest in liberalizing its own agriculture. And it doesn't have a lot of interest in liberalizing its non-agriculture or its services, apart from the Bangalore outsourcing electronic delivery services. China is someplace in between this array. China is not keen on liberalizing. Its basic line is that they did all the liberalization they need to do when they joined the WTO some years back. And Brazil is, I would say there's more enthusiasm in Brazil than either in India or China, but I don't think it's unrestrained enthusiasm for liberalizing either industry or services. We conclude, Jeff and I, that out of this difficult negotiating situation, and the lack of enthusiasm in the business community for pushing this forward, the resistance to globalization generally in a lot of different ways, that the political level of the talks is probably too low to make the breakthroughs necessary that would achieve a satisfactory result. And we are enamored of the suggestion offered by President Lula, which was to hold a trade summit. It would be a somewhat different composition than the G8, because the three important countries I just mentioned are not part of the G8, that is India, China, and Brazil. And they really need to be there, and part of the breaking of this deadlock, and we see it in order and to go forward, and also it needs to be at a higher political level. We've tried this idea out, as President Lula has, on various people. I would say there's no real enthusiasm for it now, prior to the G8 meeting, which is hosted by Russia, but later in this year, as these deadlines are slipped, which I think is a likely forecast, maybe the sense of urgency will get greater, and we would have the opportunity for a trade summit which would really push things either late in 2006 or early in 2007. Let me conclude with a forecast which we wrap our policy brief up on. If the Doha round slides to a shallow conclusion, and I think there will be a conclusion, because the trade ministers who are ministers today, this is their chance in history. And they don't want to walk away with failure written on their resumes. So they will conclude something, but it could be a shallow conclusion recognized by all the experts in this room and elsewhere, and not something that one would be, say, terrifically proud of the way one might have been proud of the Uruguay round. If that happens, we think the momentum for bilateral and regional agreements will be, which is already strong, will be that much stronger, and that will be the avenue for trade liberalization for at least the next decade, through 2015 or beyond. And that's probably regrettable in the sense that the multilateral system is better on all accounts, but that's not the worst possible outcome, because the worst possible outcome would be just to have a freezing up altogether. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With no further delay, we shall move to Ms. Dorothy Davosky, if you please. Yes, it's here.
Well, thank you very much, Gary. I'm sorry I missed a couple minutes of your opening. It's always a pleasure to be here. It's particularly fun for me to sit next to my good friend Clodoaldo, who is a very fierce advocate for Brazil's interests in the WTO, now that he is fortunate enough to reside there and not always flying in and out of Brazil, and to jumping off airplanes and going to meetings, and to my good friend Tim Rife, who has been a fierce negotiator for the United States, and he's still pretty fierce, but fierce from a different vantage point on the Hill. I think you have two great experts on the multilateral trade negotiations and perspectives. I guess I have to start out by saying that I'm not sure that I would agree with Gary's eulogy over the Doha round. I think that we have some opportunities in the course of the next couple of months to put the negotiations back on track, and I would be very concerned that the suggestions that we're not going to succeed in meeting all our deadlines is going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So for the United States, at least, we think that 5 years for the negotiations has been long enough. We think that the milestones that have been set out since Hong Kong are very important to make. There's a milestone of April 30th to try to achieve modalities, or what the parameters for the market access and non-agricultural market access and agriculture negotiations are supposed to be. Thanks, Clodoaldo. the July 30 deadline, where basically those parameters are going to enable us to put initial offers on the table or schedules on the table that then would become the subject of further negotiation in the second half of the year. And then also to have a better sense of where we are on some of the other issues in the negotiations, whether it's in services, where there is a deadline for offers to be tabled, or in areas like rules, which are important to both the United States and Brazil, in areas like anti-dumping, where although Clodoaldo doesn't like to admit it sometimes, I think we have more in common than we do in terms of differences. In areas like fish subsidies, where I think we're working hard to deal with the problems of overfishing and the subsidy disciplines there, to areas like trade facilitation. So our goal was really to have working texts on the table from the various groups by the end of July, so you can start to see how the package is going to come together. As Gary said, we do have a deadline of the end of the year. Every negotiation needs a deadline. Seems like all the multilateral trade negotiations usually use U.S. deadlines, and Gary's absolutely right. To meet our TPA deadlines, we really do need to wrap up by the end of the year. I think the negotiations are not stuck. We're not moving quite as fast as I think we'd like to do. I think Hong Kong was an important milestone. We didn't make as much progress as we'd hoped, but I do think we made some progress in sort of clearing away some of the brush, particularly on some of the development-related issues. And I think that there was a return to the negotiating table in January with a recognition that time was running out and that we really needed to face the music and deal with the most important issues, and that is the modalities. So my sense is, having been in Geneva in some of these meetings, that there is a real determination, including at the political level, to try and put the negotiations on track. We have our TPA deadline. Brazil has elections. There are all sorts of good reasons why the negotiations should conclude by the end of the year. But most importantly, they should conclude by the end of the year because of the enormous potential that the negotiations can give to the global economy. And I was just teasing Clodoaldo here because there's a great FT article from the 13th of February that says Brazil offers concessions to get Doha back on track. First line is, Brazil is prepared to make whatever concessions are necessary to push the Doha round of trade liberalization talks forward. This is something President Lula said in South Africa. And I think that that's a very important message. I don't think that there's been any doubt on the part of the United States that Brazil is going to step up to the plate and do what's necessary to conclude a deal. And that also means that Brazil is going to work very hard for a result that all of us can sell in our respective capitals, just as the United States is going to do. Now, that may surprise you. I think if Brazil and the United States were left to do the negotiating, particularly with our friend Clodoaldo here, I think we would be in a position probably to make pretty rapid progress. Why? Because I think in the give and take of multilateral negotiations, what you have to do is to develop some trust. You have to basically be in a position to try out ideas and have enough confidence that in trying out those ideas that you're both working to solve a common problem. So I guess my first point would be that we very much value our partnership with our friends from Brazil in moving the Doha talks forward, whether it's President Lula and President Bush, I think are in pretty close contact on the negotiations and their importance, but also between Ambassador Portman and Minister Amorim and at all levels of our negotiating teams. So we need to try to see what we can do to play, I guess the best thing to say is the what-if game. One of the most important things that came out of the Davos meeting that a lot of our ministers went to was to get over this idea of everything has to happen in one file before anything can happen in other files. And that requires a huge amount of trust that the expectations are going to be met in areas like agriculture before countries are comfortable showing what they might be willing to do in NAMA and services. I think we understand that, and I think at the same time there is a concern that if you wait until everything is done in one file, like agriculture, then it's going to be impossible to catch up other areas like NAMA and services. And quite frankly, for some of us, agriculture is very, very important. It's at the center of the talks, but it certainly is not enough by itself for us to sell a package domestically. I think we've had pretty good discussions with our Brazilian friends about the importance of moving ahead with non-agricultural market access negotiations and with services. Has Clodoaldo said that he's going to do everything that I'd like him to do in the services and NAMA negotiations? Not yet, but I'm always hopeful. And I think the spirit of trying to see where the problems are and trying to send signals about moving forward is very, very important. When our ministers see each other in the next couple of weeks, I think you'll see a pretty strong push from our side, not just from on agriculture, but on services and non-agricultural market access. Now, the Brazilian side has said, yes, we'll go ahead and pursue non-agricultural market access. We have some concerns, but we are interested in having a good outcome. Sometimes I like to tease Clodoaldo that sometimes the Brazilian business community is more interested in a good outcome than certain segments of the Brazilian government, but we all have to play the game. And in services, I think we have probably a little bit farther to go in terms of moving the package forward. But for us, I think the most important thing is that we are working together, we are moving together, and we recognize that we need to bring a lot of other countries along in order to move the process forward. There are a couple of definitional questions, and I'm going to be a little bit provocative because I know it'll make for a much more interesting response from Clodoaldo. In the Doha negotiations, people have started to talk about real market access. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what does that mean? Of course, all market access is supposed to be real. Well, in the WTO, you have an opportunity to lock in your tariff rates at one level, and for some countries they have a high tariff rate and then they have a lower applied rate. So what does that mean? That means that you could have a really big result in the non-agricultural market access negotiations and really not materially improve market access opportunities, that certainty that the tariff isn't going to go up. Now, it cuts both ways for many countries, but finding real market access is, I think, will be a litmus test for us, not only in non-agricultural market access, but in agricultural market access from both developed countries and developing countries. That gets a little bit more complicated in both the Ag and NAMA negotiations because there's provision for quite a lot of flexibility, which on the one hand is very important because I think the WTO rules have proven to be flexible enough so that countries can undertake progressive liberalization, and if you need to make an adjustment, you can do so under the rules. But there are some issues in the negotiations which have, if not really managed carefully, can really undermine the potential for liberalization. My favorite expression is something that became very fashionable, I guess, in Brazil, and I know it's one of Clodoaldo's favorite terms, and that is policy space. That developing countries need policy space in order to, see, I provoked him, to be able to have the freedom to make their own development decisions and to move forward. Well, we all have a need for policy space, all sovereign governments. So our point is that you can do that without basically asking your WTO partners to give you a blank check. in terms of how you want to participate in the system. So I know that Clodoaldo understands this concern. We've talked about it many times, and I think probably he's going to explain to you his vision of policy space and how it's consistent with WTO rules. I told you you'd have to come to the U.S. at some point and make sure that you weren't misunderstood. So there is that concern. There is also a provision in the NAMA negotiations to provide for less than full reciprocity by developing countries in the negotiations. And there's also provision for flexibility from the formula that we're supposed to be negotiating in the non-agricultural market access negotiations. Same issues arise in the agriculture negotiations, where there's an expectation, although there's no agreement, as to the differences between developed and developing country contributions in market access. There's also the provision for special products and sensitive products. There's also the potential for a special safeguard. So again, you could have a situation where you've done a lot of negotiating and you have a lot of potential that is undermined by a lot of the flexibility that's built into the frameworks. And I think that, for us, is going to be one of the biggest challenges in the negotiations. There are two other definitional issues that I'll just hit on, just because I want to make sure that people understand what the issues are. There's all this notion about a Swiss formula, and it's named a Swiss formula because it was, I think, proposed by the Swiss in the Tokyo round. But basically, it's a way to cut high tariffs more in the negotiations. That's the simple explanation. It's nothing that our Swiss friends have proposed this time, but it does offer us the opportunity, both in agriculture and in non-agricultural market access, to create the potential for real market access. Last thing I would mention are our sectoral initiatives, another favorite I know of my friend Clodoaldo's, but something that, at least for the United States, in the non-agricultural market access negotiations, were actually extremely important in coming to conclusion in the Uruguay round. Unfortunately, Brazil decided that it didn't want to participate in a lot of the sectoral initiatives, like in chemicals, or after the Uruguay round was over, in the information technology agreement. We think that Brazil lost out. There's enormous potential for zeroing out some of these sectors, and I'm ever hopeful that my friend Clodoaldo, now that he's in Geneva, will be able to persuade folks in the capital that maybe some in the business community are right, that Brazil should have a closer look at some of these sectoral initiatives. We're also talking about them somewhat in the agriculture area. I think I probably have gone on longer than I should, and I haven't been provocative at all on rules, so I'll leave that to my friend and colleague, Tim Reif. But suffice it to say that I think the United States and Brazil are in common agreement that what we need to really have in the next couple of months is the outline, the shape of a very strong agreement. I think for both of us, we recognize that agriculture plays a central role, but I think for both of us, there is a commitment to really work very hard on other aspects of the negotiations. It probably wouldn't be enough for just Brazil and the United States to get along on this. I think we're doing what we can to persuade other partners, including the European Union, that we're determined to have a good outcome, and we are determined to have a good outcome not just in agriculture but in services and NAMA, and I am very pleased to have the opportunity of this conference to again make that point very, very publicly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. de Vosking. With this cues, I'll necessarily need from Team Reif, which I'll leave to the end of this panel. Of course,
Oh, you can't complain.
exercising my powers of moderator, give Mr. Clodoaldo, Ambassador Clodoaldo Huguenet, the right to answer.
I had to get your blood pressure.
Well, I won't do that, because, in spite of all the provocation from my friend Dorothy, I'll stick to the presentation of Brazil's views on the round, and by doing so, perhaps I'll also make some comments on the U.S. position in some matters. Well, first of all, let me say that we do feel that we must complete these negotiations by the end of this year. And we should strive to do that. I can understand people's skepticism about the possibility of doing that. It's correct, we've missed all deadlines, but I do feel that there is in the Hong Kong Declaration a deadline of 2006, and we can't miss that deadline. If we do miss that deadline, I think that the round will be in jeopardy, and if the round is in jeopardy, the WTO and the multilateral trade system would be under pressure, because as Gary said, I think that then the pressure to move your negotiating resource and your political support to bilateral and regional negotiations will increase dramatically. And I think that would be to the detriment of the world economic system. So I would really hope that we can conclude, and we should work towards that end. And Brazil is determined to do that. And in agriculture, the G20 is determined to do that. And the G20 is now a central actor in agricultural negotiations together with the United States and the European Union. So what is needed to do that and to try to conclude by 2006? And by 2006, I don't mean it must be exactly at the end. It can slip to, let's say, beginning of 2007, but certainly conclude this within the current Trade Promotion Authority of the United States, and avoiding some of the pitfalls of the electoral process of next year. First of all, I think that we all agreed that we should move in concert, and we should try to avoid this sort of linkage where you need to move in one area to allow movement in other areas. This is not, however, to say that agriculture doesn't remain the central area of this negotiation. So for this negotiation to be successful, you must have a strong package in agriculture. Why? Because agriculture embodies, I think, the development dimension of this negotiation, because agriculture is the area where restrictions are still pervasive, both in terms of high tariff protection and other protection at the border in the form of quantitative restrictions, and also in terms of the amount of resources at the disposal of governments to implement trade-distorting policies. So a thing that has been abolished in industry for 40 years. So I think that agriculture, for all these reasons, is central to the success of this negotiation. And if it weren't for agriculture, probably wouldn't have a round of trade negotiations. So what is needed to have a successful outcome in agriculture in the course of this year? I think that there are, in export competition, as Gary said, the Hong Kong Declaration took the two major political decisions that were needed to conclude the discussion on export competition. First, it set an end date for the elimination, the total elimination of all forms of export subsidies, and then it indicated how this should be done, with the majority of this eliminated by the mid-period. So I think we now have to agree on the disciplines on parallelism. This is complex, this is intricate, but I think this is feasible, and it doesn't need any further, I think, political guidance. So to me, the balance now in agriculture lies on the two other pillars of the negotiation: domestic support and market access. And there we certainly need movement on the part of the United States in domestic support, and on the part of the European Union in market access. The offer that the European Union put on the table in market access of an average cut in tariffs of 39% is too small, combined with the treatment of sensitive products that offers prospect for too little further access to the European market on all the central products of interest to exporting countries. So they need to move clearly on market access. And up to now, the European Union has been holding back and indicate that they can't move on market access because this would take them beyond what they have been implementing in the current cap reform. So I think that the Europeans have now the responsibility to move in concert, and for them to move means movement in market access. On the part of the United States, they have been enjoying, together with the European Union and other developed countries, of a lot of policy space for the past 50 years in agriculture. The United States has now an allowed permitted level of trade distorting resources of around $70 billion. The European Union an allowed level of trade distorting support of $110 billion. So that's a lot of policy space. And it's a lot of water also, because the United States uses only around 20-something billions of dollars in terms of trade distorting domestic support. So the United States has to move. The European unions are, you can question their trade, their cap reform. You can say that there are limits. You can say that there are doubts about whether some of the programs that they are moving to the green box are really non-trade distorting. But they are implementing a reform, and they have been implementing a reform for the past two years. Here, you still need to see a reform implemented. The United States put on the table a proposal for domestic, for the reduction in domestic support, together with other conditions in market access and in other areas of the negotiation, which is an important proposal. But it's a proposal that falls still far short of what's needed, especially in the reduction of the overall level of trade distorting support. If you look at the U.S. proposal, the cuts in AMS, the amber box, which the more trade distorting form of support, are important. To our view, they're still not enough, but 60% cut is important, and we recognize that. Reducing the capping, I don't know if you are all familiar with all the details of it, and I don't want to go into that, but the reducing the cap of the blue box from 5 to 2.5% of agricultural products is an important move. But if you look at the overall level of support, you'd see that by the end of the implementation period, the United States will still enjoy the same amount of resources or a little more that they have today in terms of trade distorting support. So there's still need further movement on the U.S. there. So I think that there is a balance, and there is a balance also because the United States has always linked domestic support to market access in agriculture. And we also want to see an important package in domestic, in market access. But we also want to see an important package in domestic support and in the reduction of the policy space the U.S. enjoys in that area. So, just to answer some of the provocation.
What are you going to do about policy?
Now, the other components of these negotiations are NAMA and service in the area of market access. I think that there we need to have some contribution on the part of developing countries. NAMA has become largely a north-south, although not totally a north-south negotiation, because the tariffs are still higher in developing countries, and there is a need for a contribution. I think that both Brazil and other developing countries, especially the more industrialized ones, are prepared to make a contribution in NAMA. And this contribution would be a contribution that is significant enough to conclude the negotiation successfully. But it will not be a contribution that doesn't bear a relationship to what we are receiving in other areas of the negotiation where we have offensive interests also. So it must bear a relationship with what we are getting in market access in agriculture. And this is now recognized in the Hong Kong Declaration. And I think one of the important features of the Hong Kong Declaration that introduced paragraph 24, which establishes a clear balance between market access in NAMA and agriculture. So a proposal such as the one that the European Union put on the table in October last year to cut agricultural tariffs in the European Union by 39% and ask the developing countries to cut their industrial tariffs by 75% is out of the question. There is no balance there, and no one is going to do that. If you want to improve the results of the negotiation in NAMA, you must come with money to improve market access in agriculture. And the Europeans up to now haven't done that. So if people want to see results, everything is linked in around. It's a single undertaking, and everybody must to move at more or less the same time, in parallel, in concert, in tandem, whatever way you want to express it, but in a balanced way. It's not possible to achieve a result that's totally unbalanced, where the developing countries will pay the price of this round. So services, I think that we have, in the case of Brazil, an open market on services. I think I'm not going to go into the discussion of the intricacies of the service negotiation. The only thing that I would say is that you don't need any major political decision on service. There is now guidance to conduct plurilateral discussions. We are going to start doing that from next week onwards. About 20 areas of plurilateral discussion should be launched in Geneva, and we have to see how this would conduct to further market opening in services. And it's clear that the attempt to change dramatically the structure of the GATS failed, with the attempt of the Europeans to establish numerical benchmarks in the service negotiation. So we are now conducting the negotiation, the traditional positive list approach, request and offer, and so on, in the service area. And I think that this will conduct to a substantive service package. The other dimension of the service negotiation that's important to Brazil is the dimension of rules. And there we feel that there is one central area, which is domestic regulation, in which we should work. Rules, anti-dumping, and I hope that we can develop a common approach, both Brazil, the Friends of Anti-Dumping, and the United States as regards reform of anti-dumping legislation. I think that we need to have an end to the abusive use of anti-dumping legislation, and we need to have a correction of the imperfections of the anti-dumping agreement. And we also need results in parallel in the area of fisheries, where, for instance, Brazil has put an important proposal on the table to control the use of subsidization in fisheries and to acknowledge the impact of subsidies on the exhaustion of fishery resources across the world, and also on the area of subsidies, where the United States shares an interest in expanding the area of prohibited subsidies. So I think that a balanced package on rules is extremely important for the success of this negotiation. My final word is that this should be, and it was launched to be, a development round. Some decisions were taken in Hong Kong, but they are more or less of a limited nature, both in the area of duty-free, quota-free, some waivers for the least developed countries, and some positive treatment of the cotton issue to contemplate the interests of the Central African countries. So, but that's not, that does not exhaust, not even near to exhaust the development dimension of this round. The development dimension of this round includes the correction of some of the problems of the left by the Uruguay round in the area of implementation. It includes, thought I would forget that. It includes also the question of how to deal with development in each of the market access areas and in each of the negotiating areas of the round. So we feel that unless we have a strong development dimension in this round, it will be very difficult to count on the support of the vast majority of the WTO members for a successful outcome of the WTO negotiations. So these are my comments, and we would be working together with the United States, the European Union, the G20, and all other countries to try to bring this to a successful conclusion. I'm hopeful that this is achievable. Whether we are going to succeed, it's an open question. And it will require the disposition of everyone, but especially of the major partners, to make movements now and not wait for the last minute. Trade negotiators have the tendency to try to slice the concessions and then hold back on movement on their part to the last moment. I think that the last moment has now arrived. If everybody doesn't move in concert, then I think that what Gary said will become true, and we are not going to conclude by the end of this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador Clodoaldo Benet. We have, the mood of this panel is more or less like that. So it's up to you, Mr. Tim Riff, to put it back on the track on optimists, saying yes to most of the questions just put forward so far. Please.
Well, what a happy task.
15 minutes.
And I'll hope to spend less than 15 minutes so we can get into questions. Actually, the main question that I had as I was driving down and contemplating my comments is why I was selected to be on this distinguished panel. And then the answer came to me that it was my wife's family in Mujimirim and in Campinas had contacted the embassy. And in the last 2 years, we've had 3 little children born, and they know that my career is kind of stagnant, and so they wanted me to have more of a profile. So they called the embassy to ask them if they would put me on this distinguished panel. The reflective glow from the ambassador and from Dorothy and from Gary would. So thanks to the embassy for doing that. But I have to say, I was in driving. I had kind of a whiplash this morning. I was driving and I was reading the comments of the Director General and his optimism about the results, and then I came in and listened to Gary, and it was very difficult to reconcile the two views of both individuals that I have a lot of respect for. And as I was listening to Dorothy and listening to the ambassador, it reminded me that when you've been in trade negotiations, you know many things. One of them is you can't really understand negotiations unless you're in the middle of them. So I'm not going to try to offer too much of a perspective on where things stand. So I don't think one can, as an outsider, do that very intelligently. But what I thought I would try to do is offer some observations of where I think the mood of the Congress is, recognizing that it's difficult for me to speak for a single member, let alone a group of members, let alone the entire United States Congress. And in that respect, my comments are on background, if there's any press here. I think one given for those of us who work there is that within about 12 months, we're going to be considering either renewal of the Fast Track Authority to try to complete a round that has not been finished on time. At the moment, that seems to be the more likely scenario. Or we'll be preparing to implement the round, which is the more sought-for scenario, I think, by everybody. So one way or another, there's going to have to be some attention paid. I'm not predicting that if the round is not finished on time, that Fast Track could be renewed. I think if you looked at the fight over the original Fast Track, one would have grave, I think it would be difficult to predict that would be readily renewed. Nonetheless, I think that's where, from the perspective of the Hill, that's where we'll be in about a year's time. And in that respect, I thought I would offer a series of observations that hopefully will be of use put together in terms of the mood on the Hill. Some of them, if you think of it as a balance sheet, probably good news. Some of them probably challenges for those who are trying to negotiate. One of the challenges has been the shredding of the bipartisan alliance on difficult trade votes over the last 4 years. From the China PNTR vote, which was a new high point of bipartisanship in 2000, to the difficult votes in 2001 and 2002 on Fast Track Authority itself, and then the effort on CAFTA. In between, there have been many bipartisan votes on other FTAs, 5 of them, I believe, in all. But I think when it comes down to the kind of efforts that will need to be made to implement the Doha round, you're going to need a broad-based coalition. That's going to require a lot of work. The good news is that USTR is now led by an individual who seems to be reaching out to the outstretched hands of Congressman Rangel, Congressman Cardin, others on the Democratic side who've been waiting for someone to work with for a number of years. So I think that's both a challenge and also some potential opportunity. The second is, and I don't think there is time this morning to get into this, I think that there is a misperception of where Congress is on the subject of globalization. And here I'm almost reminded of the song Officer Krupke from West Side Story, where the child is misunderstood. And I think that Congress is largely misunderstood on the subject of so-called protectionism. It's a word that I think is still too readily used in the discussion of trade issues. But let me offer just a couple of illustrations that we can discuss in questions or that you can think about as you go about your work. The difficult fights in the fast track, in the CAFTA, and in other trade agreements are not over whether to have a trade agreement, or not over whether to liberalize trade, including in the most sensitive sectors such as apparel. But they are over the regulation of trade. For example, the question of the balance between intellectual property rights and the access to essential medicines in developing countries. And let me say there is not much of a debate with respect to that, with respect to developing countries, with respect to developed countries, where on both sides of the aisle there's very strong support for not allowing discrimination against innovative pharmaceutical products in developed country markets. When it comes to poorer countries, there's a debate as to exactly where do you draw the line. Some would draw it one place, some would draw it another, but that's not a debate about protectionism. Similarly, the debate about labor standards, which is really not engaged in the WTO, but has been a key fight with respect to the FTAs, is not a debate about protectionism. It's a debate about where do the standards get drawn. We now understand much better the Republican position being based on a concern for whether the United States applies basic ILO standards. That's a position that members on my side of the aisle would question, and yet it's one that can be legitimately debated. Fortunately, we have moved beyond the pretense that one side was arguing for greater trade liberalization and those who were seeking basic labor standards were in a protectionist mode. Now we're engaged on the debate over what is the appropriate kind of standard to put. Is it an issue of whether the United States has to change its labor laws, or whatever the position of the various parties might be? But it's not a question of whether we should be liberalizing trade. That issue is not joined in the Congress, has not been joined as long as I've worked there, since the last 6 or 7 years. So I think that's good news, because it suggests that the issue about globalization, to paraphrase James Carville, is it's the rules, stupid. And I don't mean in this instance the anti-dumping rules. I mean broadly defined rules, whether they're about intellectual property, services. That's what the debate is about. So I think that's good news. And I think it segues into some more specific comments now about the rules that we will be negotiating in respect of Doha. First, obviously, in agriculture. Again, I think a split screen. The good news is that I think there is a desire for additional market access in more developing country markets, as well as obviously Europe and Japan, other developed countries. The challenge is there is not a sense, I think, on the Hill right now that there is very much prospect of a good deal in the short term, in part because of the relatively limited actions of the Europeans in the market access area and in the subsidies area. I may have misunderstood the ambassador, but I was disappointed that he didn't single out the Europeans with respect to domestic subsidies as well as with respect to market access, both areas where the United States is, in our view, far ahead. Now, that is not to say work does not need to be done on this side of the Atlantic, but I think the view in the Congress is we've been in the situation of having a vast imbalance in what is allowed. We don't want to go there again. There may not be complete parity sought, but certainly a great reduction in the imbalance. And that is not apparent at this time. So opportunity as well as, at this point, a very significant challenge. Rules. The main question many people on the Hill are asking is, why are we in a broad renegotiation of this agreement? The anti-dumping agreement is the only agreement outside of the built-in agenda that is open for broad renegotiation. Why the exceptional treatment? What is it in the documents of the Uruguay round? What is it in the application of anti-dumping measures that is calling for this? I hear oftentimes that there's wide abuse of the rules, and yet, in the case of the United States, other countries, virtually no cases being brought. Why don't we challenge if we think that there is non-transparency, if there are problems that our good friends in Brazil or otherwise have? Why don't we use dispute settlement, an agreement that's barely 10 years old, and I can attest with great personal I don't know what, Soros, I guess, is probably the best word, that it was an enlightening and yet quite a painful exercise to go through the renegotiation of that agreement 10 years ago. So I think there's a significant question there. And then turning to the WTO agenda itself, market access in the industrial sector, and in particular non-tariff barriers. There is, I think, a sense that there is very little prospect of a significant agreement on non-tariff barriers, even if miraculously an agreement on NAMA can be, a significant agreement on NAMA could be achieved. And it is difficult to overstate the significance of that. There is a recognition, I believe, that for the United States and probably a number of other countries, the non-tariff barriers are at least as important as tariff rates, particularly as tariff rates have come significantly down. So I think that's a significant obstacle to building significant congressional support in the next year. Finally, perhaps a note on a subject that might not be expected, but is something that the member that I work for is very strongly interested in, is the question of how the result of the round will treat the poorest countries. And here there is disturbing research coming out from neutral sources that raises the question as to, even if there were a somewhat significant result in agriculture, how much would that in fact do to lift the fortunes of the majority of people in the poorest countries? And increasingly, the research raises questions as to whether that would occur. This is an issue for two reasons. One, at what one might call a moral level, given that the level of poverty in these countries is extreme and in many cases growing. The disparities of wealth are growing. But more practically as well, at a commercial level. That is to say, if there are a group of countries that are essentially marginalized, were marginalized when I was at USTR and are now even more so in terms of share of world trade, what does that say for the increase of demand to absorb the products that are being produced in this country, in Brazil, in China? It is not an equation that I submit, and many, I think, increasingly submit as sustainable. So I think one has to ask several questions. Can that issue be resolved solely in the round? What other kinds of efforts need to be made in order that a significant result in the round can be achieved, and yet the poorest of countries can become more engaged in the world trading system? In particular, what is the role of the World Bank in assisting that to take place? So I guess in summary, and I shouldn't close without discussing obviously the interest in services, which is very strong and which I think many in the Congress are on record of. So let me close though without rambling on. In a year's time, I think you will see Congress engaged on this subject. I think Congress is looking to be engaged on the WTO, recognizing that it is the largest, by far, bang for the buck when you pass a trade agreement. There is, I believe, bipartisan restiveness over passing small FTAs. There tends to be significant support, great affection for the countries involved, and yet the question is, what does this do for the United States commercially? What does it do for the world trading system commercially? I think there was great potential support when the Korea FTA negotiations were announced a few weeks ago, and I think that should send a clear signal to the WTO that the Congress is looking for significant agreements. So again, good news for the WTO, and yet if we can't move forward with a significant deal in Geneva, that there would be other opportunities for the United States. So a challenge for the WTO. I hope that those remarks have been somewhat enlightening on at least one person's perspective on the Congress's outlook on the Doha Development Agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rife. Very interesting remarks. I think that I found the reason that I'm the moderator of this panel by listening to the reasons you are here. Is Mojimirim, where I happen to be a producer there in Mojimirim. And in this perspective of the producer, I think that what you have mentioned, it is very interesting. I mean, all the discussions that are being conducted, so painful and so difficult as we saw, in fact, they will not, do not solve the problems of the agricultural trade worldwide. The first remark I'd like to make is about market access. Who are the players? When you see the soft commodities like soya beans, 4 or 5 buyers. Take the example of coffee. Brazil is the biggest producer, but who is the biggest exporter of coffee? Germany. So this is points to be considered too, and I think that will be very interesting to know how this trade will be organized, not only liberalized. The second point is the effect of subsidies, which you also mentioned. And one effect which shall be taken into account, and I think that we have very good examples here, is that by supporting a higher price, the effect is that you over agriculture the land, because you may pay for more materials, pesticides, hormones, and so on, and then lead to situations like having to produce beef with hormones, with creating a public health problem, or over farming the land, for instance, in the Mississippi Valley for cotton, where you see is producing sodic saline soils, very difficult to correct. Of course, if you have higher price sustained artificially, then of course you do whatever necessary to increase your production with these side effects, which are not neglectable. With this specific, just pinpoint this remark, I'd like to open to the floor the questions, for questions, and asking you please, those who are interested in putting questions to the table, that identify themselves before.
Stunned them.
There is a gentleman here.
Yes, Gary Blumenthal, War Perspectives. I want to take off on what Tom Rife was saying, that questioning whether poor countries are really helped out in the agriculture negotiations if we liberalize there, from the standpoint that they're in such poor shape in so many different ways. question probably mostly directed at the ambassador, since the question really relates to all of the list of things that Dorothy went over: special and differential treatment, special products, etc. All this policy space. The concept of the WTO is that liberalized two-way trade is an economic positive, and if we're going to have all this policy space, is that not an economic negative for these countries? So is it really, is this whole negotiation going in the right direction, where we're really leaving all of this policy space and consequently leaving countries really poorer in the end?
Ambassador.
Well, look, there's a lot of literature on the linkage now between trade liberalization and poverty reduction. The last addition to the literature is a huge volume by the World Bank, which perhaps everybody should consult, indicating the positive linkage between trade liberalization and positive reduction, including case studies of several countries ranging from Brazil, India, China, Zambia, Mozambique, and discussing using all sorts of econometric models, a number of cases by country and by products, and focusing also especially on agricultural liberalization. There are also opposing views as regards the effects of trade liberalization on poorer countries. I think that everybody recognized in agriculture that there is a big difference between countries that are more competitive on agriculture and that have a fast-growing commercial agricultural sectors, such as Brazil, Argentina, that are major exporters of agricultural goods, and other countries like India, Indonesia, some other Asian countries, African countries, that have large rural populations producing at subsistence level, and with a perspective in the long run to benefit from the results in trade liberalization in a trade negotiation round, but that face some short-term problems of adaptation. I have no doubt that if you look at what the poorest developing countries export, they basically export agricultural products. So this would tend to indicate that if you liberalize markets in both developed countries, and if you liberalize also in the bigger developing countries, these countries would benefit from the results of the round. But the recognition that they face short-term products is included in the agricultural negotiation, in particular by the use of true instruments, the designation of special products, where these countries would be able to protect their markets for these products, especially staple food for the major part of the population, products from family agriculture and so on, and also by the use of special mechanisms if there are cases of price depression or surge in imports, a special safeguard mechanism that is now agreed we should have as one of the instruments. So this to take account of the short-term problems. Let me also say that in the case of the poorest countries, some of the more advanced developing countries have indicated that their intention to adopt, to give preferential access to their markets in the context of the round. This is the case of Brazil, and Brazil has announced that in the context of this round, it will create preferential access to the Brazilian markets to the least developed countries. So it's the first time we are doing this. India is also doing this, so we are certainly concerned. Beyond that, we are taking part in a round of South-South trade in UNCTAD, the so-called General System of Trade Preference, GSTP, which is to promote the development of South-South trades through preferential access to the countries of the markets of developing country markets. My final comment is that beyond market access, I think that all these countries can have major gains if the developed countries eliminate trade-distorting domestic support, because that's what really hurts. Take the case of cotton in some of the poorest countries in Africa, like Burkina Faso, Mali, Benin. The price of cotton was reduced dramatically in the world market by the level of subsidization of U.S. production of cotton. So if people are really concerned about the situation of the poorest countries, and if people are really concerned about the prospects for these countries in the world trading system, they should really be serious about abolition of trade distorting policy. And